Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Introduction to Philosophy. This week, we're going to be talking about applied ethics. So, recall that applied ethics is a subfield within moral philosophy. It applies moral reasoning to real circumstances, right? So, we saw that normative ethics, last week has to do with sort of figuring out what makes something good, what makes something wrong, right? Well, in applied ethics, we care about solutions to specific problems, right? Um, is euthanasia morally permissible? Is capital punishment ever morally permissible, right? Uh, is abortion ever morally permissible? Because of recent events, we're going to spend time today talking about that last topic, right? Is abortion ever morally permissible? I'm sure you know Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court this summer. There has been a lot of anger, a lot of argument about it. Um, so, given that we don't have enough time to cover all of applied ethics, right? You could spend more than an entire semester just doing applied ethics. We can really only cover one thing, and I felt as though that's probably the most appropriate use of our time. Um, Okay, so we're going to look at two different moral philosophers then approaching this topic. One is going to argue that abortion is not morally permissible for certain reasons, and the other is going to argue that it is, right? That abortion is morally permissible. We're going to start with the negative position first. Okay. All right, so opposed we have Don Marquis. Marquis, his paper is Why Abortion is Immoral. He sets out to do a few different things. First, he wants to describe the current debate about abortion. He wants to then argue that both pro choice and pro life arguments are faulty. By the way, you might disagree with how some of these positions are labeled, right? Maybe you think pro life isn't so pro life, etc. There's a lot of arguments here. But we're just using the terms that the authors have used. So, he wants to argue that both sides of the argument are faulty in some ways. Then he wants to offer some new considerations that he thinks could make both positions better. Ultimately, however, he thinks that he'll be able to support the pro life position more so. Okay, so to begin, he thinks that there's really this central assumption behind most debates about abortion, right? Which is that how we land in determining whether it's morally permissible or not depends on our views about personhood, right? Is a fetus a person? Or, to put it this way, is a fetus the sort of thing that it's wrong to kill? Right? Is a fetus the sort of thing that it's wrong to kill? If you say yes, well, then you're likely to think that abortion's not morally permissible. But if you say no, then you're likely to think that it is morally permissible, right? So he's got this assumption that is somewhat fair. I think the conversation is a bit more complicated than he thinks, which we'll get to in our second reading, but for the most part, with sort of lay conversations on this topic, that seems to be the case, right? So, pro choice advocates are those who would argue that fetuses are not the sort of thing that it is wrong to kill, while pro life advocates argue that they are, right? Okay, so there's a sort of symmetry between the views, and that both have something good and both have something bad, Marquis says. The typical pro life argument, according to him, is that fetuses are human, and therefore abortion is akin to something like murder, right? Why is it the case that a fetus is it's wrong to kill a fetus? Well, because they're humans, and it's wrong to kill humans. Marquis has a pretty quick criticism. Uh, that's too broad, right? Human could apply to all kinds of things we don't really mind killing, right? Like, in some sense, human cancer cell clusters are human. So just having the label human doesn't really do anything. Doesn't really do anything, at least not enough to make the argument. The typical pro choice argument, according to Marquis, is that fetuses are not persons, and therefore abortion is not murder. Right? It's permissible because they're not persons. His criticism here is that this is too narrow, right? Because personhood, if you think of personhood as something like being a rational being, right? There are these kind of living things, and then there are these kind of living things that are persons. If you think what divides those two classes is something like rational nature or rationality, well, then you're going to have to deny personhood to things like, or people rather, like developing children, the severely mentally ill, or disabled, right? And killing those people, Marquis says, is definitely murder, right? So both of these arguments so far are not quite hitting the mark. Okay, so both are right in thinking that the other is wrong, but they both have problems. Okay, so he's going to try to fix them. Here's version 2 for both. The typical pro life argument, version 2, says something like, it's always wrong to end the life of a human being. Okay, we fixed the problem of human being applicable to like human cancer cell clusters and things like that. Now we're talking about human beings. Marquis says, okay, so you've gotten rid of the human cancer cell problem, but you've invited in new difficulties. Now you have to show that a fetus really is a human being. How are you going to do that? Right? What makes a human being? What's the line, right? What is the line between a non human being and a human being? We're going to have to get pretty clear on these criteria. The typical pro choice argument, version 2, right? It is only wrong to kill persons where persons include uh, people like children, the disabled, etc. Right? So now we get to say, well, we're extending our notion of personhood to include these people that might have been excluded by some other people. Okay. Marquis says, that's fine, that does fix the problem, but it's also seemingly arbitrary, right? You were just arbitrarily extending the notion of person. In other words, you're defining it how you like, right? You're not defining it according to any kind of rule or standard. You're just defining it how how you would like. Exactly the same way that the pro-life arguer here is defining human being how they would like to include the notion of fetus. Okay. So even when they've been fixed, Marquis says there's still a lot of problem here, right? There's still a lot of work to do. Okay, so the crux of the problem then, he says, is that the typical pro-life argument requires that some kind of biological category confers some moral quality to our actions. In other words, having a certain belonging to a certain kind of biological class is what gets you moral status, right? Belonging to the biological class of human, for example, is what gets you moral status. Um, but this, it doesn't seem like, can be argued for very cleanly. On the other hand, the pro choice argument requires a kind of psychological category in order to get that moral status, right? You don't get to have moral status unless you're the right kind of thing, like a person, where personhood is defined by some kind of psychological characteristic, like being rational, right? That's what makes you morally worthy. Um, Marquis says, exact same problem. This is kind of an assumption. You're not really going to be capable of motivating that. So, how do we work our way out of this problem? Well, Marquis thinks that the way to go here is to take a step back, right? Instead of asking whether or not fetuses are, uh, it's okay to kill them, right? Instead, let's just talk about what makes killing, just in general, what makes killing wrong when it is wrong, right? Okay, so he wants to give a theory of just that. What makes killing wrong when it is wrong? Here's a quote. After all, if we merely believe but do not understand why killing adult human beings such as ourselves is wrong, how could we conceivably show that abortion is either immoral or permissible? Right? So if we don't even understand why killing us is wrong, how could we possibly explain why killing a fetus is wrong or not wrong? Right? Okay, so here's a starting point. He's going to assume from the beginning that it's wrong to kill us, right? Us as like fully realized human beings right now, right? Further, it's wrong to kill us because of the effect that it has on us, the victims. It's not wrong to kill us because our family members would be very sad or something like that. It's wrong to kill us because of us, right? Okay, so he's hoping you'll grant him that exception, that assumption rather. I think it's fair, right? Okay, so why is killing wrong? He suggests, Marquis suggests that killing is wrong because it deprives the victim of a valuable future. Here's a quote. When I am killed, I am deprived both of what I now value, which would have been part of my future personal life, but also what I would come to value. Therefore, when I die, I am deprived of all the value of my future. Inflicting this loss on me is ultimately what makes killing me wrong. So, what makes killing a person wrong? You're depriving them of a valuable future. Okay, so he gives two things in support of this. First, he says this makes sense of the fact that we consider murder to be one of the worst crimes, right? It's the worst crime because you're robbing someone of an entire future, right? A valuable future. Two, it makes sense of the experiences of people who know that they are dying from some kind of disease or condition. Uh, Marquis contends that it is the belief that they will lose a future that they would otherwise have, which makes them think that their premature death is bad. Okay, so the idea here is that if you're on your deathbed, right, let's say prematurely, right, you're a young person dying of some kind of terrible disease, for example, and you grieve that fact, what you're grieving, Marquis thinks, is the valuable future you could have had. So this kind of view about why killing is wrong makes sense out of that notion, right? Okay. Consequences of the view. Thinking of the wrongness of killing like this has some notable consequences. First, it would also be wrong to kill beings that are not biologically human, okay? Because it's not the case that only humans have potentially valuable futures. There could be any number of different creatures that have valuable futures, right? Um, so this idea that uh, that earlier pro-life argument that it's wrong to kill a fetus because it's human is no longer necessary. Right now, it could be wrong to kill anything if it has truly a valuable future lying in wait for it. Right. So some non-human animals might be sufficiently like us in regards to their future, meaning it could be wrong to kill them too. Right. If an animal, some non-human animal, has the possibility of having a future that's valuable in the same way that ours might be, then it would be wrong to kill them under this view as well. But it doesn't mean necessarily that euthanasia is wrong, right? That's one kind of objection that Marquis considers, is that if you go with this view that killing someone is wrong because it deprives them of a valuable future, you might have to have a strange view about euthanasia. He says, no, if someone is truly suffering to the degree that they do not have a future that's valuable, it would not be wrong to kill them, right? If that's what they wanted, right? But it's obviously wrong under this account to kill children who are only developing, right? Given that they have futures ahead of them. So this does a better job at motivating this fact than the typical pro choice argument, which was something like it's wrong to kill a full person, right? It's wrong to kill a thing with rationality, right? This does a better job because even people that don't have fully realized rationality, it's now wrong to kill. And it's wrong to kill them because they have potentially valuable futures ahead of them. Okay, so wrapping it back to the topic of abortion, then. Here's a quote. The future of a standard fetus includes a set of experiences, projects, activities, and such which are identical with the futures of adult human beings and are identical with the futures of young children. Since the reason that is sufficient to explain why it is wrong to kill human beings after the time of birth is a reason that also applies to fetuses, it follows that abortion is prima facie seriously morally wrong. In other words, fetuses have futures that are a lot like ours, right? If everything goes according to plan, they're going to be born, they're going to be normal human beings, right? If we decided it's wrong to kill us because that would deprive us of our futures, then it would also be wrong to kill them for the same reason, right? So if all of those things are true, it seems like Marquis gets his conclusion that abortion is immoral, right? Okay, so in order to bolster his account, he's going to consider some opposing views, right? Some views that suggest that killing is wrong for other reasons, not because it deprives us of a valuable future. Okay, so he's going to look at two of these, right? Uh, he calls these the discontinuation account and the desire account. Okay, so the discontinuation account suggests it's wrong to kill someone because it causes a discontinuation of the experience of living for the victim, right? So it's about bringing an end to some kind of continuation of existence, right? It's bringing an end to it. That's what's wrong. This would support pro choice, given that fetuses do not already have an experience of living, right? So it would not be wrong to kill them. They don't know what it is to live, and therefore ending it, um, it never began, right? They never had any kind of experience to begin with. Okay. The problem, Marquis says, is that the discontinuation account would have us believe that killing is wrong in all euthanasia cases, even the most extreme, right? So if there is someone who is suffering from a inescapable disease, right? It's terminal, but it's long lasting, and they are in incredible pain, and all they want is to die. Under this view, it's not morally permissible to grant their request. It's not, because it's wrong to kill, because you're bringing an end to the continuity of experience, right? So Marquis is going to say, well, this view might have seemed like the way to go. It's not compassionate. It's not the way to go, right? What about the desire account? The desire account suggests that it's wrong to kill because it prevents the victim from pursuing some kind of fundamental desire, like the desire to live, right? So you're interrupting someone's ability to fulfill this specific desire. The problem with this view is that some people don't have a desire to live, yet Marquis argues we still think it's wrong to try and kill them, right? So a person who's experiencing extremely severe depression, it's not okay to kill them, right? Just because they don't currently desire to live, right? So this version's not going to work either. Discontinuation and desire, neither of them are going to work. Okay. One more objection. In order for one's future to count as valuable, one must value it, perhaps. And fetuses can't do that, right? They're not conscious in the same way we are, presumably. Therefore, even if Marquis is right that killing is wrong in the case of depriving a thing of a valuable future, it still might be the case that abortion is permissible. Why? Because fetuses aren't the kind of things that can value a potential future. Marquis says, again appealing to the extreme depression case, that you might be in a position where you don't see any value in your life. You don't see any value in your future, right? But it would still not be okay for us to kill that person. So then it doesn't seem to be the case, Marquis argues, that you really need to understand that your future has potential value to it. You don't need to be aware of that fact in order for it to be true. Okay? So if that's the case, the fetus doesn't need to be aware that it has a valuable future ahead of it in order for it to have one. Right? So this objection is not going to be enough. All right, so conclusion here. Quote, clearly it is wrong to kill adult human beings. Clearly, it is not wrong to end the life of some arbitrarily chosen single human cell. Fetuses seem to be like arbitrarily chosen human cells in some respects, and like adult humans in other respects. The problem of the ethics of abortion is the problem of determining the fetal property that settles this moral controversy. The thesis of this essay is that the problem of the ethics of abortion, so understood, is solvable. Right? So he thinks he's solved the problem. Right? It's abortion is impermissible because a fetus is the kind of thing that has a potentially valuable future like us. And why is it wrong to kill us? Because we have these kind of valuable futures. So the logic should carry over. Okay, so now we're going to look at the other side. We're going to look at Judith Jarvis Thomson, who's going to argue that no, abortion in at least some, and likely very many cases, is morally permissible. Okay, so she starts the article with a very interesting sort of move. Um, most of the debates about abortion, especially at the time she's writing, have to do with this notion of personhood, which we saw a little bit of with Marquis, right? That is whether or not fetuses should count as human beings or persons. Because if they do, then it seems like it's immoral to kill them, right? So most of these arguments at the time have to do with, well, are they persons or are they not? She is not convinced that that's really that important to the argument. She's not convinced that it is. She doesn't think, by the way, that a fetus is a person or a human being. We're going to see more on that in just a little bit. But nevertheless, she doesn't think that that is a necessary thing. It's necessary to solve that problem in order to argue for the permissibility of abortion, right? So what she is going to do, she's going to just grant the assumption that a fetus is a human. She's going to say, sure, take that assumption. I can still show you that abortion, in at least some cases, and likely many, is still morally permissible, right? Okay, so if she's right, then it doesn't matter if Marquis' view is correct, right? Marquis' conclusion is it's wrong to kill a fetus because of the same reason it's wrong to kill lots, right? It deprives them of a valuable future. Um, if Thomson is correct, Marquis can get more or less all of his conclusion without still getting his purpose, right? To show that abortion is always impermissible. Okay. But before she does this, she does want to make a quick comment. Even though I'm not going to talk about the personhood issue here, it is, she thinks, pretty easy to show that we could settle this, right? That we could settle this one way or the other. To make this, she gives the acorn analogy. Okay, so Thomson notes that pro life argumentation typically makes the claim that there's no clear boundary in the development of a fetus to a child, right? So there's no clear boundary from going from fetus to child, right? We know for sure it's not okay to kill a child. So then maybe it's not okay to kill a fetus either, right? That's how the move works. Therefore, placing such a boundary in saying that fetuses are not persons is arbitrary, right? Where are you drawing the line? How many weeks, right? The goal here is to say if you can't draw a line cleanly, then you don't get to say fetuses are not persons, right? Okay. So Thomson responds by saying that much the same is true for acorns and oak trees. As an acorn is germinating, right, it's going to become an oak tree. And it seems like there is no clear boundary when that happens, right? When does an acorn become an oak tree, right? There's no clear point at which we can say it's happened, right? But even still, she argues, it's not artificial or arbitrary to say that an acorn is not an oak tree. Even though we can't say when this happens that an acorn becomes an oak tree, it doesn't mean that an acorn is an oak tree, right? Okay. In the same way, even if it's very unclear when a fetus becomes something more, it's unclear where that line is, that doesn't mean that a fetus necessarily is that something more. Same move. Okay. Now on to the real meat of the article. Okay, so she constructs what she regards to be the pro-life argument. She says, premise one, we assume that fetuses are persons, and she wants to give them that. We're not really going to challenge that any further. Premise two, every person has a right to life, which is going to include fetuses because we just granted that they were people, right? Premise three, every person has a right to their own bodies. That includes mothers. However, the right to life trumps certain rights to our bodies, and therefore, abortion is immoral. Okay, so she thinks that the pro life arguer more or less is going to grant premise three. It's just that it doesn't mean it trumps our rights to our own bodies, sort of allow us to ignore our moral obligations not to kill, right? And therefore, abortion is going to be immoral by this view. Okay, so now for the remainder of the article, she's going to try and pick at this argument. First up, she wants us to imagine the following scenario. Thomson, by the way, uses a lot of what we call thought experiments. A thought experiment is a scenario that's not always, in fact, most of the time, not realistic. Right? It's a thing that you're asked to imagine, and in imagining it, hopefully it leads to some kind of insight. Right? If given these conditions, you would draw a certain kind of conclusion. Uh, the further question is why, right? Why would you draw that conclusion in these cases? And that can be sort of insightful elsewhere. Okay, so what she's going to present here might seem a little outlandish, but the purpose is not to suggest that this is something that would really happen. It's to sort of draw out an important insight elsewhere. Okay, so let's get to the scenario. You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours, so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we had known. But still, they did it, and the violinist now is plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then, he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you. Okay, so if you haven't gotten it yet, right? This is supposed to be an analogy for a pregnancy conceived as a result of rape, right? You did not ask to be connected to this person, right? It was forced upon you. But if abortion is immoral, you are expected by the world to carry this person for 9 months, right? Because without you, they're going to die, right? Same thing for the violinist. You did not ask for the violinist to be plugged up to you. But if they unplug the violinist will die. So you have to remain connected, right? Thomson wants to say, by that earlier argument, you're morally obligated to stay connected to the violinist. But that seems wrong, right? That seems wrong. It might be very nice of you to stay connected to the violinist, sure. It might be very nice of you. But you didn't ask for this. You didn't ask for the Society of Music Lovers to connect the violinist to your body, right? And therefore, it doesn't seem like you have any moral obligation to stay connected to them, right? If you aren't convinced by that, Thompson asks, well, what if the period was 9 years instead of 9 months, right? If you think 9 years is far too many, what changed, right? It's still the case that his right to life trumps your right to your body, right? That's what the previous argument said. So she's more or less trying to push your intuition here. She's trying to get you to see it's more intuitive to think that no, the violinist has no right to your body. The violinist does not have a right to your body. But if you think that that is the case, you might have to reject that premise we saw earlier, that one's right to life trumps another's right to their body, right? Okay. Thomson thinks it's absurd to claim the violinist has a right to your body when you were given no choice in the matter. You didn't agree to this. Okay, so she shows that, or she thinks she has shown that abortion in at least some cases then is not immoral. Okay, specifically in cases of rape, right? All right, the extreme view then. She briefly considers a view in which a pro-life proponent is arguing that abortion, no matter what, is immoral, even in these kinds of horrible cases. Um, so now she considers how this could apply to cases in which the mother's life is in danger, right? The pregnancy, complications from the pregnancy could bring about the end of the mother's life, for example. Okay, so here's the best argument she thinks that there is for the extreme view. Premise 1, killing an innocent person is always wrong. 2, when a mother is at risk of dying, failing to save her is not killing or murder, because you're letting die, right? You're not killing. 3, abortion involves the killing of an innocent person. Therefore, if we have no other option, allowing a mother to die is better than committing murder, abortion, right? It's the difference, of course, between killing someone and merely letting someone die. So she thinks the extreme view is very unpopular. So you have to have some way of motivating it. She thinks this is probably the best case that you can give it, right? This is probably the best case you can give the extreme view. So Thompson now asks us to consider a modification to the violinist case. Imagine now that being hooked up to the violinist will kill you, right? Not only does the violinist need you in order to go on surviving, but after all is said and done, you're going to die as a result of this. Well, now, do you think that their right to life counts more than yours? She wants to say no. No one in their right mind is going to accept that. And therefore no one in their right mind, she thinks, should accept this extreme view. You did not ask for this. You did not ask for this. Uh, and just because they need it from you does not mean you have to give it to them, especially if you're going to die as a result, right? So the extreme view she thinks is indefensible. Okay. She thinks that this extreme view is based on what third parties could permissibly do. But that's not the only way of looking at things, right? So the extreme view was based on, well, what are the doctors morally permitted to do, right? Well, they're not morally permitted to kill anybody, but they might be morally permitted to allow someone to die, right? Now Thompson kind of wants to flip it around and say, well, look, in these cases, we're not necessarily talking about what other people are allowed to do. What about me, the person who is at stake, right? Okay. So she brings in a new thought experiment. It goes like this. Imagine that you're trapped in a house with an ever growing child, right? So you're in a house and there's this child who is growing and growing and growing, right? The child is beginning to fill the house and it is starting to crush you. If you don't act, it's eventually going to kill you. While some who favor the extreme view may well say that they could do nothing to save you since they're not willing to murder the child themselves, right? Thompson argues that if you took action to save yourself, this would simply be self-defense, right? It's you or them. Sure, maybe someone feels like they can't intervene because they can't, kill someone without being involved, but you are involved, right? It's one of you is going to die, right? Or both, right? So it seems, according to Thompson, that it would be okay for you to act, for you to preserve yourself. So even this extreme view, if you could get it off the ground, doesn't say anything about what the person going through it has available to them. Okay. All right. So Thompson claims it may be that the third party can say they don't want to perform an abortion, but from this, it does not follow that they can stop another person from doing it, so long as the mother's life is in danger. So at best, even this extreme argument gets you something like uh, other people might not be able to intervene. Other people might not be able to facilitate an abortion. That does not mean that the mother whose life is in jeopardy can't do something about it. Okay, what about less extreme cases? Right. So far, we've talked about really horrible situations. What about less extreme cases? The key issue here, she thinks, is the right to life and what that means. So the first view that she considers is that the right to life means that you have a right to the bare minimum required for survival. For the violinist, the bare minimum is to share your kidneys, but surely, she thinks, he has no right to them, right? So this isn't going to work, right? Uh, because you're the only person who matches the violinist in the entire world. Your kidneys are what is necessary for the violinist's bare minimum. Well, it still, again, seemed wrong to say that you're obligated to stay connected to the violinist. So this kind of view doesn't seem like it's going to work. Second view, the right to life just means the right not to be killed by anybody. Thompson says the violinist has no right to your kidneys, assuming that you didn't grant them permission, yet removing yourself kills him. If this view holds, then the violinist, again, does have a right to your kidneys. So, once again, doesn't seem like this kind of thing is going to work. All right, what about this new tactic? The pro life advocate could argue that the right to life is just the right not to be killed unjustly. right? Not to be killed unjustly. This prevents us from falling into cases like uh, the violinist, right? Where it seems like now we can't disconnect ourselves from the violinist, even though we didn't ask for this. Uh, and therefore, it allows for abortions in certain cases, like in cases of rape, right? Abortions of pregnancies conceived through consensual sex, however, would be immoral on this view, since it would be a kind of unjust killing given the mother's responsibility. That's how this new sort of pro life tactic would work. Okay. Thompson gives yet another new case, right? Another new case to think about. She says, if I leave my window open, knowing that there are burglars in the world, does it make me responsible when my house is burgled? She thinks no, clearly not, right? Sure, I knew it was possible that I could be burgled, but it's not like I was inviting the burglars in. I didn't put a sign up that said, come burgle this place, right? Um, Further, I could imagine putting bars on my windows, right? Which she thinks is like an analogy for using a contraceptive, right? Am I then on the hook for for the burgling? No, right? So once again, the analogy here is uh, you could engage in consensual sex, right? Uh, and not have desired or wanted the result being a pregnancy. You might have even taken steps to prevent a pregnancy or to prevent the burglaring, right? By putting bars in, by using contraception, and it could still happen anyway. Does that mean you're responsible for it? Thompson thinks no. That's sort of wrong-headed. It happened, sure, and it was possible perhaps because of some of the things you did, but that doesn't mean that you invited it. That doesn't mean that you asked for it to happen. And therefore, to say that you're responsible for it happening is somehow mistaken. Okay, so to further make the point, she brings in yet another sort of thought experiment. This one is probably the strangest one, but still interesting. Quote, people seeds drift around in the air like pollen, and if you open your windows, one may drift in and take root in your carpets or upholstery. You don't want children, so you fix up your windows with fine mesh screens, the very best you can buy. As can happen, however, and on very, very rare occasions does happen, one of the screens is defective, and a seed drifts in and takes root. Does the person plant who now develops have a right to the use of your house? Right, so once again, it's an analogy for consensual sex where contraception is being used, right? So in this world that she imagines, uh, little seeds float around in the wind, right? And when they land in your house, right, they develop into people. Um, Now, we might be tempted to say if you leave your windows open and you're fully aware of this phenomena, that maybe in some sense you're responsible for any of the people seeds that take hold in your house to some degree. But if you fix your windows with the finest screens and this sort of thing, and one of them just happened to be defective in just the right way, she wants to say, look, you can't be on the hook for that, right? You tried everything you possibly could uh, to prevent this from happening. It still happened anyway. You can't really be on the hook for that, right? It's like a tragic circumstance, not something we should say that you're responsible for. Okay, but the pro-life advocate might say you could have still avoided this consequence, right? How? Well, in this case, you could have sealed your windows and doors, right? You could have never gone outside, right? You could have stuck to abstinence, right? Thompson thinks that's unacceptable, right? It's unacceptable to say, look, you can never leave the house, right? In the case of the people seed example, to tell this person you can never leave the house is too far, far too far. In the same way, telling someone, look, uh, you should just not have sex then, right? Is unconscionable, right? Not a thing that we have available to us. She thinks it's an absurd requirement of people. Okay. So, how extensive are our duties to other people? Thompson considers yet another case. Twisting again the violinist. What if you only needed to be connected to them for an hour in order to guarantee their survival? Not 9 months, not 9 years, just 1 hour. And there's no risk to you. you will definitely be in just as good of a health as you were when you were connected, right? In such a case, Thompson thinks you do sort of have an obligation to remain connected. Maybe not a strong obligation, one that you have to do in order to remain, uh, a morally good person, but a thing that would be morally good of you to do, right? So here's a distinction she has between good Samaritans and minimally decent Samaritans. Good Samaritans are those that go above and beyond. They do what we call in moral philosophy supererogatory, right? That means even more than what they're required to do. Okay? They help however they can. A minimally decent Samaritan, however, is someone who does the bare minimum. They're not doing anything wrong, right? They're just doing what's required of them and nothing more. So she wants to say uh, that we should expect people to be minimally decent. That's the only thing that you can expect from anyone is to be minimally decent. You can't demand that people be good Samaritans. You can't demand that people go above and beyond. Only that they do what's required. Okay, so she thinks it would be minimally decent to stay connected to the violinist if it only took an hour and there was no risk to you. Right? This is the kind of thing that you probably should do. But pro-life advocates seem to require women to be good Samaritans, incredibly good Samaritans, not just minimally decent ones to their unborn children, right? So they're not just expecting what's minimally necessary. They're expecting you to go far above and beyond what is required of you, right? Remember when we looked at the original violinist case and it was 9 months? I think you're going to be hard pressed to find a person who says, yes, I'll stay connected, right? If you say yes, you'll stay connected to make sure the violinist survives, you're an incredibly good Samaritan, right? Incredibly good. Most people are not going to go with that option. Okay. So Thompson further argues to remain consistent. This means that the pro life advocate should argue in favor of Good Samaritan standards elsewhere. So if the pro life advocate is going to argue that women need to be good Samaritans to this degree when it comes to um, facilitating the life of an unborn child, then they should expect, being consistent, Good Samaritan standards elsewhere, right? So if that's the case, well, they should let the violinist stay connected to them for 9 years, right? Perhaps they should even allow the violinist to remain connected to them, even if it would mean their deaths. Now, of course, we're not going to do that, right? But if you can't expect good Samaritanism there, why do you demand it elsewhere, right? Okay, so conclusion then. Thompson thinks that assuming that fetuses are persons still does not show that abortion is immoral. There can be all kinds of ways that abortion is still permissible, even if a fetus really is a person. Why? Because it's not necessarily the case that someone's right to life trumps your right to your body, right? In the case, especially where we were looking at the violinist, an allegory for rape, right? Where this was non consensual, this was forced on a person. You've done nothing uh, consensual to deserve this level of responsibility, right? It doesn't seem like you have made the choice to sacrifice that autonomy, that right to your body, right? And therefore, it doesn't seem like a thing's life trumps that right. Okay, so even if you do grant fetuses personhood, then, Thompson argues, does not show that abortion is morally impermissible. However, in some cases, being minimally decent, Thompson thinks, would require you not to abort, right? So abortion for Thompson is not permissible across the board. She's not saying that abortion is always going to be okay. Um, so here's her quote on the matter. It would be indecent in the woman to request an abortion and indecent in a doctor to perform it if she is in her 7th month and wants the abortion just to avoid the nuisance of postponing a trip abroad. Right, so she's imagining these cases in which the decision is made in a sort of very cavalier manner, right? Like, I want to have an abortion not because having this child would be very detrimental to my life or their future lives or whatever, just because I like on a whim felt like it, and very late in the pregnancy, right? So she wants to say maybe there are some cases where um, you would expect even a minimally decent person to carry the child to term, right? When exactly where this line is drawn, Thompson doesn't really make clear. She just wants to acknowledge that it's not going to be permissible across the board, right? You're not going to have something like an 8-month abortion or something like that under her view. Further, a mother's rights does not include a right to secure the death of their unborn child, right? So back to the violinist, Thompson says, if it was found that you could detach yourself from him and he could still survive, it's not within your rights to then go and kill the violinist, right? So, in the same way, if a child can be, or a fetus can be detached from the mother and still continue surviving, it's not within your right to demand that the child be killed nevertheless, right? Which is not something that people who are pro-choice are really arguing for, right? Um, she's just making sure that it's clear what her position actually is. Okay, so summing up, Marquis thinks that abortion is impermissible. Why? Well, because what makes killing a person or anything wrong is that it has the kind of future that is valuable in the way that our futures could be valuable. A fetus, because it could develop into being a person, has that kind of potential future. That's why it's wrong to kill a fetus. That's why abortion is going to be morally impermissible for Marquis. Thompson says no, uh, it doesn't matter if the fetus has a potential future. It doesn't matter if the fetus is a person. The kind of thing that it's wrong to kill, that everyone acknowledges is wrong to kill, because one's right to their body is not always going to be trumped by another's right to life. Right? She makes this case using her violinist example. That's the big thing you should get out of the Thompson paper. All right. Well, hopefully you found that interesting. There's a lot more to talk about in regard to this particular debate. Um, these are fairly old articles. There are new ways of talking about these issues now. But once again, we really only have time to sort of dip our toes in the waters here. Um, but hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully you found it thought provoking. Next week, we're going to be shifting gears to something totally different. But until then, stay healthy, stay safe.